Hello everyone, you can call me Freebiewits, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Analyse and Adapt Season 2, where I see if a TV series would work in 3 different mediums. Tabletop as in board and card games, tabletop roleplay like Dungeons and Dragons, and finally, as a Larp. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. These little things really do help the channel. Today, we're taking a look at The King's Avatar, specifically the live-action version available on Netflix, which is where I watched it originally. For those of you who don't know, The King's Avatar is a show about a fictional esports scene of a weird MMO-like RPG called Glory. It follows the exploits of the top player Yishu, who quits after his manager tries to get him to accept more sponsorship deals since he takes, well, zero. Absolutely none. He's originally offered a coaching position on the team, while the MMO character he's made is given to another player, but feeling betrayed, he quits and leaves the esports team regardless, leaving his character behind. Due to a clause in his contract, however, he doesn't get to keep any money and is barred from competing for a set period of time because of the way he quit. A period of time he spends leveling up a brand new character and account, recruiting talented but inexperienced set of people who eventually help him return to the esports scene. One of the things that is refreshing to me is the fact that even though it takes place primarily in the MMO world, it does have real life drama around it. There's no ambiguous mystery on why people are getting locked into the MMO, unable to leave, like .hack or something like Sword Art Online. No, everybody is in a relatively real-world scenario. The thing, however, that I like most about the series is the fact that the other players, who are still on the esports team, still respect and like the main character. There's still a friendship there. Even as his rivals, they seem to do their best to help him, even while restricted. Despite the MMO focus, the series is firmly rooted in reality, no isekai or magic involved. So with that all said, let's try to convert The King's Avatar into a tabletop game. Being a MMO type game with a team-based tournament PvP structure, there's a lot to draw from when trying to figure out what to make. In theory, we can make a tactics-type board game with tiles, abilities where 2 players face off against each other, with pre-made teams. Think of it like chess or Final Fantasy Tactics, except, well, on the board and such. From there, we could lean into the more MMO aspects of the game and have the players team up and fight giant boss monsters and the like. Or we could forego the actual fantastical elements themselves and just be an esports manager. There are tons of fantasy-type games out there where people fight each other all the time or take on monsters together, using their strengths to cover each other's weaknesses. But, using the real-world aspects of The King's Avatar, I believe we can make something truly unique. To that end, I can see this becoming a drafting card game where players would take the roles of managers. To win, a player must have the most glory points. Each card would be a specific player or character, all with their own special abilities. Now, when I say player and character in this context, I mean the players in the show and the characters they use within the game themselves. Certain players will prefer different kinds of characters and avatars, and of course get more powerful as a result. That said, not every player might have a preferred character/avatar, and some characters can just be generic, well, characters, like a level 50 brawler or something without a name. Some players might not even play the game themselves, and instead contribute outside of said game. They could be a coach to keep them healthy, or a chef that feeds them, or someone who sponsors them with money, that sort of thing. Hell, some characters can be great trash talkers or screw with the opposing team in meta ways. Before the draft, an event can be randomly chosen or specifically chosen by the players themselves with different modifiers and victory conditions. Maybe it's an actual tournament match where money doesn't matter. Maybe it's a dungeon run or a special boss fight where only the strongest characters can survive. Either way, people who draft will then have to adapt their strategies to the circumstances. Now that I mention it, in the show there's usually multiple factions going at it outside of official tournament matches, all racing to deliver the final blow on a boss or to conquer a dungeon the fastest. To that end, we can always have this card game involve more than just 2 players. The possibilities and scenarios are endless, but the only thing that matters in the end is who has the most glory in the game of Glory. Pun! Anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to tabletop roleplay. At its core, The King's Avatar, when seen through the lens of a group activity, means we can handle this in one of 2 ways. The first is to have the players be professional esports players or being average players on the MMO server who just meet up online to do stuff. Both campaigns have their strengths and weaknesses. If the players are part of an esports team, it means that their lives and the game itself will be more structured. No need to plant quest hooks because they're already there. Basically, their responsibilities are to turn up at the venue for a tournament match and then play. That's not to say that playing the video game is the only thing they do. They could also attend press events, do sponsorship deals, and play politics with the other esports teams. For more motivation beyond winning the championship, we could also have a rival team with ex-members who were poached from theirs. We could have other players cheat, something that happens on the TV series itself. We could introduce debts that have to be paid, giving the feeling of danger if they don't win. Hell, we can even have someone ask them to throw the game for money as well, for even more conflict. Outside of esports, having them play as random players also has its own advantages. For one, if one of the real world players doesn't turn up for the game, they can just treat it as them literally not logging in. Because there aren't any real stakes in an MMO beyond the ones that you make for yourself, the players can play said game at their own pace and leisure. So that all said, there are mechanics that I'd suggest to the game that would separate it from your D&Ds and Pathfinders, and that's the meta mechanics of the real players. Now, I don't mean the real players as in the ones you see in front of you at the table, I mean the ones in the game in front of their computer. Now, I know that's confusing, but please, bear with me. Some players have better reaction times than others, so a pro playing a level 1 character might be able to beat a level 10 character being played by a newbie, for example. Then you have computer power itself and of course internet connection issues. A lagging character might be easier to hit, for example, and of course being AFK. If the player leaves the game in real life, we could, in theory, introduce an AFK mechanic. Would it be fun? I don't know, but since death in a video game is a slap on the wrist at most, it's not that bad, I'd say. Oh, and you of course have glitches or in-game mechanics. Physics can be weird. If someone grabs me by the scarf in a video game where the scarf is a physics object, I can just unequip the scarf and go free, for example, stuffing it into my hammer space/inventory. Let your imagination go nuts. Remember, it's not meta if it's part of the in-game universe and game. With that all said and done, let's move on to Larp. While role-playing as esports players or video game players on tabletop might work, I don't think we should take that specific route with Larp. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Pretend we're famously skilled players and just sit down and play video games? I mean, it could work, but it's like LARPing as famous football players by actually playing football. If that's your idea of fun, I have no room to criticize. I just feel that it's a bit redundant is all. But for the sake of argument, what would a LARP like this look like? Well, to begin with, we'd have to introduce out-of-game drama, just like we do for the tabletop versions. Sponsorships, press events, etc. Not much you could change, but we'd need more people to play as NPCs for that sort of thing, unless your players are okay with pretending that the area in front of them is filled with a horde of adoring fans. Which, now that I think about it, isn't that far-fetched as far as LARPs go. What's the difference between that and imagining that a piece of foam is a destructive roaring ball of fire, right? Furthermore, if we're using a video game to play out this fictional esports team, people with actual skill in said video game would be more successful than others, the same way a naturally fast LARPer would be better than a slow one. Would this LARP have a leveling system for the players themselves? And the default answer is probably no, we just play by skill alone, but if the answer is yes, then well, that's when things get interesting. So in my mind, the leveling up powers might not affect the actual video game playing itself, but it could give other, more meta bonuses. Things like making the player get more or better sponsorship deals, for example, or letting them cheat in the actual video game itself, or at least having a better chance at getting away with said cheating. Maybe leveling up will give them a bigger fan base, even if they're not the strongest player around. Based on these meta aspects, the ability to taunt or predict enemy thoughts can give said players video game buffs, adding an extra layer on how to play. If the organizers of the LARP own their own servers and have dev tools and the like unlocked, they could manipulate things more directly to emulate higher esport plays and resources, activating and spawning items as required for the game. Of course, at this point, it feels less like LARPing and more like online role-playing at this point, unless you're literally doing this in person. It's a blurry line to me. If we want a LARP with actual foam swords involved, then I suggest a fantasy-style LARP with lagging and similar meta mechanics to be included every now and then. And hey, if that works, it's got the added convenience of explaining why people come back to life if they die, and why they just disappear if the player stops, well, playing. So that's my analysis of the King's Avatar and how it can be adapted into 3 different mediums. How do you think it'd work? Have any of you tried adapting any of the elements of the show yourself, and if so, how did it go? Consider leaving a comment, liking the video, and subscribing. Sharing it would also help the channel. My name is FreebieWits, and thank you for watching. Bye bye.
But if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself.